Well, if you follow the news closely, Kim Jong Un, the current leader of North Korea, plans to travel to Russia this month to meet with Vladimir Putin, who is also the leader of Russia today. And given the fact the whole world continued to follow the war in Ukraine, now this time, since we know that Kim Jong Un is planning to travel to Russia to meet up with Vladimir Putin, of course, that raised a lot of eyebrows among the members within the international community. And also some believe that this time, the cooperation is beyond what we called a military cooperation and something much deeper. But meanwhile, how should we understand the reaction from China today? And just because China has not said anything, that doesn't mean China is not well informed regarding this solid relationship between Kim Jong Un and Vladimir Putin. Well, in this episode, we're going to talk about what can we expect between Kim Jong Un and Vladimir Putin during the meeting, and also how should we understand this ongoing relationship between the two countries. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you follow our show, you should be familiar with Jenny Tang. Again, Jenny Tang is a senior fellow at the Stimson Center, and she's the director of Stimson's 30A North program. Her expertise is in North Korea and US-DPRK relations and US-ROK alliance and Northeast Asia regional security. Well, Jenny, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Thanks, Will. It's great to be back.
Well, Jenny, I want to read a quote for you, and then I want to get your reaction on this. As we mentioned before, now Kim Jong Un, as the leader of North Korea, plans to travel to Russia this month. According to some expert, they believe, and I quote, is the resurrection of a traditional alliance that serves the strategic interest of both Putin and Kim, end quote. Jenny, you're the expert. Now, from your perspective, why do you think it's crucial and important for Kim Jong Un to take the trip to meet Vladimir Putin, and given the fact that we know that Vladimir Putin is no longer a popular kid within the international community? What is the motivation behind that?
Well, I think we have to look at the trends of DPRK-Russia relations over the past, 2 years. We have seen deeper alignment, deeper relations. We've seen a number of high-level statements from Putin and Kim Jong Un, with Kim Jong Un pledging, not only political support for Russia and the traditional friendship between North Korea and Russia, but also material support. And this is what's different this time around from previous relations between the two countries. So it really shouldn't be surprising that it's actually happening, right? Like that we're seeing the deepening of relations, we're seeing material support being offered. And certainly North Korea, as one of the few countries that's been openly and consistently supportive of Russia as Russia's pariah, status grows, that political support is going to get rewarded. There's going to be benefits for North Korea in that process, whether it's food and oil, or whether it gets into, deeper cooperation on, technical assistance in the future. There's a lot that North Korea can gain from that relationship.
Jenny, it's almost coincidental that you and I, we just had a conversation not too long ago regarding the Camp David summit, that President Joe Biden invited both leaders from Japan and also from South Korea to talk about this international security. And of course, that at the summit, and according to the press conference, that North Korea was one of the significant topics that among the three leaders. Now, how much do you think that having this meeting between Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un, it's really another, I want to be careful, it's not the word political revenge, but it's a political signal to Washington, to South Korea, and also to Japan at this moment to say, hey, listen, three of you can be best friends, but meanwhile, you need to understand that we are not going to be the bench players. We can also form relationship, even though China, as I mentioned before, has not said anything. But look at the two people, Kim Jong Un and Vladimir Putin. Those two people that shall not be underestimated, given the fact that we're looking at these political trends today. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, nothing happens in a vacuum. There's so much going on these days. And there has been a common concern amongst China, Russia, and North Korea watching deepening US, South Korea, Japan relations, trilateral, especially trilateral security cooperation, as well as Japan, South Korea growing relations with NATO and bringing NATO directly into Northeast Asian security affairs. And even watching things like, AUKUS, when AUKUS and the minilateral security pacts in the region start to affect regional security. So there is, I think, some of this reciprocation, right? So as we're seeing from North Korea, when the US does, massive live fire drills, military drills. You see North Korea also doing military drills. I think the summit leaderships, the summit meetings amongst the leaders, either bilateral, multilateral, all of that is being calculated as to, what should, North Korea, China, Russia do in reciprocation to show that, that they're not just going to sit back and watch things happen, that they're making their own plans because now they have greater common security concerns.
Now, some believe that Putin wants Kim Jong Un to agree to send Russian military shells and also tanks and missiles, and of course, in return, that Kim Jong Un would like Russia to provide North Korea with advanced technology for satellites and nuclear-powered submarines and etc. As you mentioned before, Jenny, this is a relationship of reciprocity. So in other words, it's not just one side is willing to offer plenty supplies to the other, because both parties and both leaders want something in return, which could be beneficial for the country, but meanwhile can be very anxious and also threatening to the international community. Now, again, coming to you is, we understand the war in Ukraine today continues, but meanwhile, if Kim Jong Un were a smart person, he should be able to draw the distance away from Vladimir Putin. And again, you think about it, given the fact today, it's rather to gain a friend, rather to become the enemy for the world. Why do you think this is so important for Kim Jong Un? I mean, again, it's beyond the security, it's beyond this personal relationship. Is it really more essential for him to gain this what we call advanced technology for satellites or nuclear power submarines? Why do you think those things are important for North Korea, or particularly for him at this moment?
Warren, I think we need to step back for a second. We don't know exactly what North Korea is getting out of this. We don't know what Russia is going to be willing to provide. And there's a lot of things that aren't technology related that Russia has to offer North Korea, because North Korea needs a lot of things, right? So like I said, it could be everything from food, like wheat and flour and, oil and gas. It doesn't necessarily mean that Russia is automatically going to start cooperating in advanced technologies, even if the North Koreans want them, right? That is a decision that the Russians will have to weigh as to how that fits into their own strategic calculus. North Korea providing, small arms and even manpower in Russia's war on Ukraine, these are things that the North Koreans can afford, that they have in surplus. They're not necessarily great quality. They're not going to be game changers in the war, even if they help prolong the war and Russia's ability to prolong the war, right? But the reality is that North Korea is already a pariah. It's not like they're in good standing and now they're choosing a side that would put them in pariah status. They're already a pariah. And there's already, this whole move towards Cold War mentality, towards, values-based world order with democracies on one side and non-democracies on the other. And certainly North Korea is not a democracy. It's already being ostracized from, the sort of stronger side of the equation. And this is what is also driving a lot of deeper alignment between China, Russia, and North Korea in general. Even when the countries are doing things that might be against other countries' national interests, there is still value in that security cooperation amongst those as a reciprocal security bloc in the sort of, the blocks that are forming. So, for the North Koreans, this is something where it's very low political risk for them. They're already friends with Russia. And it's high reward. They're definitely going to get something. They're going to get something easily. They're going to get something quickly. It's not going to take a lot of negotiation, which is what, any kind of efforts with the US or South Korea is, that their experiences, right? That things would drag on forever and ever and ever. And they may or may not get anything out of it. And even if they get an agreement, it may or may not be implementable. This is a low risk opportunity for them, with definite rewards, even if those rewards are small.
Jenny, politically speaking, when we talk about international leaders, we tend to say, or we tend to describe a person's personality. But too often, given the fact today, we're looking at a lot of uncertainties, or we're looking at a lot of expectations. Again, I want to be careful, but still, I'm very interested to ask the question, between Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un, which one do you think it's more insecure about the fate of the country? Again, on one side, that we're looking at this economic hurdles for both countries, particularly for North Korea, as you mentioned before, but also Russia, it's facing major break as well. Again, we're looking at the war in Ukraine. But if we take a closer examination, look at the two people, you're the expert, Jenny. So from your perspective, which one do you think it's more insecure about themselves, about their status among the international community, or could be both of them? Your thoughts?
I think Russia, I think Putin has to be more insecure, given the fact that, expectations, there are social, civil society expectations in Russia that he has to contend with. And so as the economy plummets, as Russia's pariah status grows, it isn't just the international community has to worry about. He has to worry about his own domestic constituencies as well. That is a pressure that is much less in North Korea because of, the repressive regime, because of, the control apparatus that already exists, as well as just low expectations in general. You don't have, a civil society that expects great economic growth or great economic development. It's a very subsistence level mentality to begin with. So I think, Putin definitely has greater pressures on him, and has a bigger role in the international community. So there's more for him to lose, right? Where again, North Korea just doesn't have that international standing. So if he starts to, be more of a pariah, he's just more of a pariah. He's already a pariah.
Jenny, again, as soon as the news broke out regarding this trip, now the countries such as the US, Britain, South Korea, and Japan have said many times that any arms deal between North Korea and Russia would violate the UN Security Council resolutions. You and we previously had a discussion about this as well. Now, going back to the question, how much do you think that both countries, or particularly North Korea, actually care about the violation of UN Security Council resolution at this moment? I mean, again, I think you and we have this many times, and we discussed, numerous times for our interviews, but still at this moment, it's not just the West. It's more countries actually join the effort to say, would you please stop supplying the weapons to Russia? Would you please stop being the supplier or being the cheerleader for Russia? Because this is not a healthy relationship. But also, we know the personality of Kim Jong Un. Also, we know the temperature of the country. But again, Jenny, from your perspective, how much do you think that Kim Jong Un or even North Korea care about the violation? What do you think of that?
I mean, North Korea doesn't recognize the validity of UN Security Council resolutions against it to begin with, right? They don't adhere to them. They don't accept them. Again, this is a situation where Russia has again more to lose, right? Like they in the past have wanted to be in good standing on the DPRK side of the equation, right? That they are following and implementing UN Security Council resolutions against North Korea. And again, one of the benefits that North Korea gets out of deepening this relationship at a time when Russia's pariah status is growing is Russia's support at the UN Security Council as well. So that, both China and Russia have blocked any further actions against North Korea in the Security Council. despite all the testing, all the illegal weapons testing and missile testing and satellite launches and everything else that North Korea has done that violates international sanctions. So, you know, like this is, again, as we move greater into this values-based world order, you start to see these deepening alignments amongst countries that are under sanctions. You know, some like to call it the coalition of the sanctioned. As, you know, like they're all being oppressed in a certain way by the international community for the decisions that they've made, and they've started now to have, you know, common interests, common enemies in that process. And so there's greater incentives for them to ignore sanctions and you know, find ways to better their own relationships and their own, you know, national interests in the process.
Not too long ago, that when the news broke out and reporters asked, again, let's bring China into our conversation during the press conference, and I can't remember exactly which reporter, but asked the question regarding Kim Jong Un's trip to Russia, and the press secretary answered the question in a very brief way to say, well, we were notified about the situation, but meanwhile, China has not official comments, or China has not any reaction on this. But meanwhile, Jenny, again, as you and I would discuss before taping the show, that China is the critical player when we look at Russia, when we look at North Korea. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, by knowing that Vladimir Putin is going to meet up with Kim Jong Un, what role, from your perspective as an expert, does China play in this summit, or again, in this relationship? So in other words, because I believe that, again, we don't know what's going to happen, but one way or another, China is going to come out in the conversations. And I believe that both countries have to acknowledge that without the presence of China, without the support, or China can be a mutual player, or can be a backbone for this trilateral relationship. How do you think that China is going to play out during this relationship between Kim Jong Un and Vladimir Putin?
Well, you know, it's complicated because I think, you know, the North Koreans are going to do what's in their best interest, right? In their own, what they see as their best interest. And so developing a relationship with Russia, again, brings a lot of, you know, potential benefits for them. I am sure China, in the meantime, will try to, you know, talk to both sides before they meet, to make sure that their interests are also reflected in whatever is talked about, or at least just to not be completely outside of the process. But, you know, even if China doesn't agree with what's happening, it doesn't mean that, you know, Russia and North Korea will stop. So there is a certain level to which that relationship will develop on its own, in concert as much as possible. You know, it's obviously stronger as a trilateral alliance, but, you know, it isn't fully dependent on what China thinks. And we're at a situation now where I think there's also greater confidence that even if China doesn't like it, they're not necessarily going to turn against either, you know, North Korea or Russia now, again, given the geopolitical trends in the region. Like, they can't afford to. They see both as important security partners. And so it gives, you know, both Russia and North Korea a lot more political space to maneuver within their own relationship. And again, and do things that China might not like, but that won't rise to the threshold of China turning their back on them.
Jenny, two more questions before letting you go. Now, let's go back to talk about North Korea, this missile testing, and also the nuclear weapon development. And again, throughout the media, we've seen footages and also videos regarding the existing condition of the missiles and also of the nuclear weapons development in North Korea. Again, Jenny, you're the expert. Sometimes it's rather foolish for us as an outsider to try to estimate the capabilities and also this function of the nuclear weapon. So from your perspective, how far or how well developed is the nuclear weapon today in North Korea?
Look, you know, in an R&D process, there's always going to be failures, and that's how they learn, and they'll learn from it. They'll fix it. They'll test again. Every country that develops any kind of weapon systems, this is a process. The North Koreans, nuclear weapons technologies are decades old. This isn't, what we're talking about in North Korea is not state-of-the-art stuff. It's, basics. And we have seen them progress in their capabilities over the last, 20 years, and especially within the last, 10. Do they have at least a rudimentary nuclear weapons capability? Yes. Do they have, a variety of missile systems and, diversity of launch systems, making it very difficult to predict what they might use at any given time? Yes. Do we know how many of these missiles are, actually have been deployed, have been manufactured? No, absolutely not. We have no idea of the numbers of what systems actually have gone into manufacturing or actually deployed in the field. And, there's lots of questions because of the limited amount of testing they've done per weapon system. There's lots of questions about the accuracy, the reliability, and the durability of the weapons themselves. But is there enough capability to be concerned? Absolutely. And there's enough capability that's been demonstrated that you have to plan for, what if this is a real system? What if it is deployed in a certain amount of numbers? How does that complicate our defenses? All of those are real concerns that need to be taken seriously, even if the numbers aren't as much as we expect, and even if the systems aren't as good as what most countries would want it to be. But there's one thing I think that the international community has time and time again underestimated North Korea's ability to thrive in these areas. And North Koreans have shown over and over and over that if there's a will, there's a way, and they're going to do it.
Jenny, I want to ask the last question again, going back to the Camp David summit that Joe Biden invited Kishida and also Yoon to attend the summit. And also, of course, that we mentioned before, China, North Korea, Russia, many issues were top the agenda. But again, let's ask the very simple question. How much do you think that either South Korea or US is prepared to take the next step to deal with North Korea? Because again, given the fact that US has already sent the strong warnings to Russia, to North Korea, even I'm sure that as soon as the news broke out that Kim Jong Un is going to visit Vladimir Putin. But right now, it's really critical and also essential for South Korea and Washington to take the next step in order to avoid another disaster, or say the potential threat from North Korea or from Russia. So how well prepared, or how much do you think that South Korea and also Washington is prepared for the next step?
What do you consider to be the next step?
Say military defense, say deter, or any other possibilities that say not to allow North Korea continue to be a threat. Because again, Jenny, last time you and I would talk about this before, we're looking at US political situation is standing at the crossroads, and also right now the South Korean political situation is also in this limbo situation. So again, how do you measure that? How do you think the next step they're gonna take?
I mean, they're already taking steps, right? Like that is part of, especially the priorities of the bilateral alliance. A lot of it is on trying to improve extended deterrence, improve deterrence posture, try and, improve assurance in the process of South Korean anxieties. So, there's already things in motion on the defense side of the equation. You can't deter North Korea from being a threat. You can't. You would want, a diplomatic track to go along with all the deterrence messaging that's going on in order to, prevent any kind of miscalculation or any, misperception that could escalate into an actual conflict, which is greatly missing from the equation right now. But deterrence and extended deterrence is meant to deter nuclear use, right? It's meant to deter North Korea from attacking South Korea. In that sense, what we have in place is effective, has been effective, since the end of the Korean War. But, this idea that we can deter North Korea from further WMD testing or deter them from, building relations, this is not the right use of the word deterrence. And we need to, understand, again, if we should have been dealing with the idea of growing Russia-North Korea relations in a much different way from the beginning. Like right now, it's almost too late, right? Like they are already, speeding down the track together. But this has been forming over the past 2 years, and we've sort of just sat back and watched it happen. There should have been greater, diplomatic efforts on both sides to prevent, greater alignment from happening. If we had been more strategic, especially the U.S. had been more strategic about it, we would have been trying to, really prevent a really solid foundation from forming in those relationships. But at this point, like if they do meet, it's just another meeting of what we've already seen in terms of, the level of cooperation that's been building. And it's a reality that we'll need to deal with, both, on the Russia side, on the Ukraine side of the equation, and on the US-ROK alliance side of the equation. Can we step up efforts on like interdictions and, greater, sanctions on Russia, especially where they can be more effective? Sure. But that's not going to solve the problem. The problem is that, we're really moving into an era where it's really hard to reach across these ideological lines, because we've created such rigidity in this new world order.
That's right, Jenny. Again, right now, we don't know what will happen at the meeting between Kim Jong Un and Vladimir Putin. But one thing we do know that those two people are going to have a lot to talk about. Again, either it's military cooperation, or we're talking about this supply, or, the satisfaction to each other. But mainly, again, this is the number one concern when you put two most dangerous people in the room. And I think that really definitely will cause the thunderstorm and also these political waves. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to talk to Jenny Town. Again, Jenny is a senior fellow at the Stimson Center, and she's the director of Stimpson's 30A North program. Again, she's very experienced in North Korea and US-DPRK relations. I strongly encourage everyone to connect with Jenny through social media and just to follow her analysis and also expertise among those areas. But anyway, Jenny, thank you so much for your time. Again, this won't be the last time we have a conversation about North Korea as we continue to follow this summit or follow the meeting between the two people. I'm sure we're going to have a lot more conversations. But anyway, so thank you so much for doing this.